everybody. Welcome back to another episode of JaAR. JaAR, for those of you that may be new, stands for Joe.
And Amy.
Review. This is our weekly show where we review the Magic stories. And this week, because we are reviewing 2 stories at a time now, with the side stories and the main stories, we are reviewing both side story number 2, The Magosi Steps, which is part 2 of 2, as well as episode 3, The Dangerous Climb, The Long Fall. And so that I do the right thing here, side story number 2, The Magosi Steps, is by Miguel Lopez, and episode 3, The Dangerous Climb, The Long Fall, is by A.T. Greenblatt. My quick review at the top is side story 2 was very good. I enjoyed it. We learned some new and interesting things. We learned more about the world of Zendikar as well as the legendary creatures, which I think is a great way of handling it, right? I think it worked out really nicely in that way. And then for me, episode 3 was fine. I had a couple of issues with it, and we can talk about that. They're pretty glaring ones, but I'll talk about it at the end. But I thought it was a fine enough story. I thought it was well written. I thought it was descriptive, etc. And got to the core of, no pun intended, the core of these characters and their motivations, and kind of gave you some hints as to some things that we were talking about with Nahiri. So I liked it in that way as well. What about you?
Yeah, side story number 2 was good. I really don't have like any issues with it. I think it was just good.
Mm-hmm.
And the episode 3 was also good. Like you said, there's a couple of things to talk about, but I'm like starting to see like metaphors that might be existing that I'm not sure I'm going to talk about yet in this episode.
Sure.
Because I want to see if my estimations are correct before I start like going on that train.
That's fair.
It'll be quite the ride.
So a friendly reminder, or for those of you who have not been here with us before, we encourage you to go read the stories. We give those quick reviews at the beginning so that if for whatever reason you have not checked them out yet, we would love for you to go do that before you hang out here with us, mainly because we are not going to be summarizing. We review, we don't summarize. So we're not going to be doing the stories justice. We're just going to be talking about points that mattered to us, bringing up some things, and we would love to hear from you and have you join in the discussion as well. But to do that, you would have had to have read the story, and we don't want to be the ones to spoil it for you because that's not our goal here.
No.
So please feel free to do that, and then we would love, obviously, for you to come back and join us as well if that is something that you are interested in doing. But on to the full reviews themselves. For the Magosi Steps, I liked it. I mean, again, I don't know that there's a ton to talk about. The one thing I did like a lot, we talked a bit about Zareth and Akiri, and how Zareth left Akiri and her companions during the battle, right? Mm-hmm. Battle for Zendikar, or the battle at Seagate. And that he was, he left and he feels badly about it, but he still did it, and she feels badly that or is upset with him that he did it, but they're still together, like they're still with one another, traveling, etc. But she mentions in this story that she looks at him with suspicion and disappointment. And that's what I took that to mean, because it wasn't like immediately in reference to that, but still, that's where I took that personally, was that's what she was more referring to in that way. And it kind of contrasts with what happened at the end, which we'll talk about. But you were even bringing up that it could contrast to today's story that we talked about as well with episode 3.
Yeah.
I didn't see that, so I think that's an interesting point. And
yeah, I feel like the reason why they referenced it in story 2 was because they were foreshadowing his death in story 3.
Okay. Yeah, like I said, I didn't take it that way, but I think it's an intriguing way of looking at it. I looked at it only contained within this story, and that it was referencing his sacrifice / selfish act at the end here, which leads to the deaths of many, but not of himself and of Akiri, which mirrors the fact that the two of them were the only survivors after Seagate of their crew, and that they're now the only survivors here after this fight with the big serpent. So
right. I definitely think it was trying to mirror that.
Yeah.
but I think it was also foreshadowing his death in episode 3 because it was kind of like, hey, remember when he left you before? You know, and then he dies.
Well, and now he's not. Like, that's what I was saying in relation to that, is that in episode 3, in today's story, he ran headlong in and met his end for it.
Right.
So yeah, no, that's fair. And again, it was just an interesting way of looking at it that I hadn't seen, and so get yourself get you a new perspective by talking to somebody else about it. That's why we talk to all of you as well, because we want to hear more than we even thought about from all of you,
Right.
and hopefully present some things to you that you may not have thought of as well, if that's something that you're interested in hearing about. One big thing from this side story that we learn is about the royal. Because, this whole set is about that, right? And about, do we calm it? Is it necessary? Etc. And in this instance, we learned that the royal went away briefly following the victory at the battle at Seagate when the Eldrazi were defeated by the Gatewatch and then all the little guys by, all the warriors on Zendikar.
Right.
I was unaware of that. I believe that's the first time that they've mentioned that.
Right, I think so too.
Right. And so that's a big deal, that the royal did go away for a period, but then as this story puts it, I quoted this here, the battle had only saved the people that lived upon it, meaning the world, not the world itself. So I thought that was really good. I thought that was really awesome that it's similar to what Nissa was talking about, in that, Nahiri's whole thing is, well, the royal is, the Eldrazi are gone. The royal needs to go away. But even Akiri in this story knows, no, the royal is still indicating that the world is still hurt. There's still problems here. And so the royal still needs to be around for that. But for Nakiri, this is what we talked about last week. I've messed that up multiple times today, not in this video. But Nahiri is just thinking, well, the royal wasn't here before the Eldrazi, and now the Eldrazi are gone, so now we need to get rid of the royal because it's the next problem. That's a narrow way of looking at things that isn't great. And that's the problem. That's where this conflict all arises from. We thought it was a little odd that Zareth, at one point when the royal comes through, when we first hear all this information in this story, there's like slight rumbling. And I thought it was a little weird. The story read that Zareth touched his knife hilts. And I'm like, why? Why would you touch your knife hilts? The ground is rumbling. You know what the royal is. You've talked about it. So why would you, in response to the ground rumbling, touch your knife hilts? To be fair, the story kind of explained it by saying that the royal kind of foreshadows danger or warns of incoming danger. So that got explained away relatively quickly because I had this deep explanation of what it could be and whatever. No, it foreshadows danger. So when the royal comes through, you're like, oh, what do I need to be ready for? So that made a little bit more sense to me after that, but it took a moment. I wrote down this quote that we both enjoyed when they were fighting the serpent Verizal, who we'll talk about in a second. They used the line when Akiri is climbing the outside of this serpent. There was the line, biting through the serpent's mucosal sheath. Amazing. What a great
And I just said it gross. I was like, I never thought that I would hear those words spoken together like that. But now that I have, I'm very glad that I have.
Yeah, it was really sweet.
Because despite how gross it is, it's very good.
Yeah, very, very nice. So yeah, that was an interesting one. Then we learn about Verizal. And of course, right, Verizal is a creature in the set. And so while these side stories are about Akiri and Zareth, we still get to learn about Verizal. And I loved that as well. Because we learn that Verizal, right, Akiri doesn't know who this is. She just knows it's a big scary serpent. She's like, is it the royal itself? Is it agitated by the royal? Is it, where is this thing from? And when we get to the perspective of Zareth, Zareth is like, no, I know who this is. I know his name, or its name. This is Verizal the Serpent. Some people regard it as a god. It's a myth. We had statuettes of it in our home, as did many other merfolk. Like, that's awesome.
That's cool.
That's awesome to me. I think that's
It's
amazing.
It's really cool that they took it there and were that specific with it. Because I feel like that sort of tie back to culture and beliefs is so frequently left out when it comes to stuff like this, and it makes it less believable when it's like that, because in reality, those things very much affect people's perceptions of what something is.
Oh,
right?
Yeah. Right, a whole society's worth of just like, if there's like ancient lore regarding it or whatever, absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, and we learned that too with the old Zendikar, the Battle for Zendikar stories, where and regular Zendikar as well, where you learn that the merfolk treated the Eldrazi as gods.
Right.
Just through their knowledge of what they knew of the Eldrazi, they just regarded them as gods themselves and told like stories and stuff about them. And then they came out and everybody was like, "Oh, not that, not that. That's not what I was thinking of." So, yeah, it's the same idea. You get a change in perspective depending on how you're looking at it. And if there are scary myths and dangers and stuff, it's a problem. So, I found that interesting. And then last bits here. First of all, there was an interesting note or line from that story with Verizal where Zareth is talking about the merfolk and saying, I had statuettes of that in my home. Back when merfolk had homes and not only places to live. That is deep as hell. That is so...
It's really poignant, because he's referencing a time when these creatures were considered to be gods to the merfolk, and in this day and age, they're kind of proven to not be gods. And now the merfolk are, I assume, living in much more slummy conditions.
Right.
Is what I kind of gather from that line. And so that really resonates with, like, I think, like, there's two ways of looking at that, I guess. Like, okay, so does that mean that they've been, like, ostracized, kind of, by the other people of the plane, because the other people of the plane have said, oh, hell no, like, your gods came and destroyed the planet, like, F off? Or if it's the kind of thing where their belief system shattered, so their lives are just in shambles.
Interesting. I would lean more towards the second one, but I would also say that it could also be that due to the destruction from the Eldrazi, that you don't have the luxury of having a place where you had settled down in communities, because the Eldrazi swept through and the Royal is sweeping through and these creatures are fighting, so all you're doing is finding the next safe place to live, as opposed to, this is my home, I'm going to be here, this is where I'm going to live with my family or my friends or whatever. It's just, this is where I'm living currently, because it's very much shifting from a home to a place to survive, right? A shelter, if you will.
That would make sense if it was closer to the time when the war happened.
Well, yeah, but
and when he wasn't referencing specifically merfolk.
Sure, that's fair. I guess I'm just talking about even post the battle. They're still dealing with the Royal, and they're still dealing with the creatures. So I took it at that point as just the fact that it's still so savage in this world, because they're dealing with so many things that it would be hard to, like, establish a community in a place, because you're constantly dealing with attacks and the Royal coming through. And
yes, and that makes perfect sense, except that I think it makes too much sense, like more sense than it needs to. Like,
okay.
It wouldn't need to be referenced.
All right, fair enough.
And it wouldn't have the specificity of saying merfolk.
Fair enough. No, that's fair. And totally fine. And again, it's just going along with that discussion of Verazol, which is so cool. And by the way, we were saying Verazol definitely sounds like some weird pharmaceutical medication. Just like...
Oh, you got butt pimples? Here, use this Verazol. Just rub it on there.
FDA approved Verazol. Anyway,
make us cancer.
And then again, as I alluded to, it kind of ends with the side story ends with Akiri and Zareth talking to each other about the fact that Zareth made that plan, right? Asked the merfolk caravanners to help him push that dead oxen off of the ledge there so that the serpent would be distracted by the food and would leave them alone. Even though Zareth knew that that's not what was the case, the oxen hit the serpent on the head got upset, came up and started eating the merfolk caravanners, giving Zareth time to jump over the ledge, Akiri being forced to save him and get away from the serpent, because both of them knew that they couldn't kill it, even though they had to. They felt that they had to try. They knew they couldn't do it. Some learned it earlier than others. Right? Zareth knew it straight up, and Akiri had to learn it when the second head showed up and had been stalking her the whole time. That she was like, "Oh, I got this. I'm just gonna go get its eyes. No big deal." Right. And then the other head's just right behind her, knocks her off, and she almost dies. So. That was a thing as well, and that was basically the end of the story. Is that like Akiri didn't love that was the case, right? It took her a bit to figure that out, and she struggled with it a bit, but she knew it, whether she liked it or not. And it was a cool send off for them, as we then come to find out in episode 3 here.
Yeah, because it kind of brought it full circle. Like, this happened to us in the past. It's happening to us now. And it's grief-inducing,
right.
But it is full circle right before the next story where we pass away.
Right, and it ends with, right, Akiri reminiscing about, reminiscing isn't really the word, but remembering when Zareth left them, being upset with him for doing that and feeling so betrayed, then coming to, like, thinking about that when looking at him and feeling bad about feeling that way. And then ending with, no, I understand. I understand that you had to do that. I understand why you had to do that. And so that's the end of that. And so, yes, now we're into the bigger world, right, of Zendikar with Nahiri and the bigger problems and etc. Whereas this was a more contained story with still dealing with like a godlike figure of some kind in the serpent Verazol. But now it's the bigger, plain ending types of situations because we're in the mainline story. I, just as a heads up, if this was not clear or if I haven't mentioned it in a while, when I write my notes for these stories, I write them as we're reading. I don't typically read the story first and then go through a second time and write notes as I go. So I'm writing based on my first impressions, and then if things come up, I can alter my notes, cross things out, etc. But so when I wrote right at the beginning of this story, I wrote that there seemed to be a heavy focus on the trailer for Zendikar Rising at the start of the story. I came to find out later it was just the whole story. But I wrote at the start there seems to be a heavy focus on the trailer. It's like a shot-by-shot description of the trailer at the beginning. And there are points where it's not, but there are points where it is, and many more points where it is. And we'll talk about that more at the end. But I found it interesting that because it was so heavily trailer-focused, right, this particular story, that to my knowledge, this is the first time that this has happened, and I would love to be corrected if I'm incorrect, but I believe that this is true from my recollection of these pieces of short fiction on the website. First of all, they're all accompanied by images, or most are accompanied by images that correspond to whatever point in the story that image is placed into. And even if loosely just to show off some of the basic land art or something, which is fine. And I think that's great. That's something that I really enjoy about the stories is being able to go through and be like, oh, look at that. When we talked about Verazol and then you got to see Verazol. So cool. That I really enjoyed that. But here you have the situation where there are a lot of these images are just still shots from the trailer instead of art from the card set or from the cards. It's not necessarily a negative, but it's something that I noticed is the first time that they've ever done this, to my knowledge. And so much so that there were 11 images total for this story. 6 of the 11, so more than half, 6 of the 11 were stills from the trailer, and only 5 were art from this set. So it's a very interesting decision that they came to with this, that this story was like, this is the trailer story.
Right.
And so we're going to put in stills from the trailer, and it's going to be more numerous than the card arts because of that.
Right.
And I don't know
Either
whether that's...
that or they've just realized that a majority of the cards don't actually harken back to the story that they've now created. And so there was only 5 pictures that they could have included that were card arts because the rest of them aren't on cards.
Maybe. And that's an interesting point because one of them was Akiri, was the art for the Akiri card, which has already been in one of the previous stories, whether it was the first side story, which I think is correct, or whether it was last week's story number 2, episode 2, where Akiri was introduced to Nahiri for their travels. But I believe it was side story number 1, since that was so heavily focused on Akiri, and so you'd probably want to see her. Yeah, kind of. So I thought that was interesting as well. Also, speaking of firsts, something else that I noticed, in this story, episode 3, for the first time in these 3 stories for Zendikar Rising, we have a situation where the story is being told from the perspective of someone who is not one of the set's 3 main planeswalkers. That's not unique to web fiction in general of the main stories. You'll tend to get a legendary creature or a notable creature on Zendikar's perspective, but for these Zendikar Rising stories, it took until episode 3 for us to get a perspective that was not Nahiri, Nissa, or Jace, like being told from over their shoulder or in their head or whatever.
Right.
We get Akiri's side of things twice, I believe, in here, and the rest were Nahiri throughout. And again, not a complaint, just notable, something notable that I wanted to mention.
A bit different than
what
we're used to.
Yeah. Then we get to some of the things that you wanted to talk about a bit. Nahiri mentions at one point that she thinks that she abandoned Zendikar in its time of need, or she says that I'm done abandoning Zendikar in its time of need.
And I was just like, when did she ever abandon Zendikar? Like when she took the Eldrazi to Innistrad? Like, is that the time that she thinks she abandoned Zendikar?
Right.
Because pretty sure she spent her entire friggin' life giving a shit about Zendikar when no one else did.
Right. I was saying that what I took it as was that it was when Nahiri left, when the Eldrazi started coming out. So many names for things. When the Eldrazi started coming out, and Nahiri was like, oh good, Sorin and Ugin will come help. And then they didn't. And she went to Innistrad to go to Sorin to be like, hey dude.
Asking for help. That's not like abandoning anything.
Well.
That's like, and she's a planeswalker. It's not like she had to go on this long trip to find him.
Right.
Where it like drastically impacted, or it would have drastically impacted her ability to come back. She didn't assume that she wouldn't just come right back and with help.
Correct.
That's not abandoning.
Correct.
At all.
Well, I think it's again, because these stories are talking so much about her guilt, right, and her feelings regarding this.
Yeah, they keep shoehorning that in, even though it doesn't make sense, is what I'm saying.
Okay. Some people feel guilt, the way that I'm taking it, right, is that some people feel guilt even when it's not their fault, right? I mean, that's a very common thing. The way that I'll put it is like with the death of a loved one or something, right? And they feel guilty that they weren't there enough for them, or they didn't spend enough time with them, or in other extreme situations, it's like if I had only known that they were dealing with these insecurities or whatever. There's some things there, and I don't want to go too in depth into that because that's not what we're talking about. But that she feels guilty because when she went to Sorin, she got trapped in the Hell Vault for a very long time. And because of that, the Eldrazi got to just run rampant on Zendikar. And so to her, her failure, right? I'm not saying I agree with it, but her feelings are that it's her failure that led to her being trapped in the Hell Vault, which led to Zendikar having to fight against the Eldrazi by itself and get so harmed in the process. That's all I took it as, personally.
I understand that that's how you took it as, because that's how they framed it, that's how they wanted you to take it.
Right.
My point is, it's incorrect characterization. And it's incorrect continuity, realistically speaking.
Okay.
Because it's trying to say that she feels that she's abandoned this plane, even though there's no reason for her to actually feel that way whatsoever.
Because your point is that she should continue to have that ire for Sorin, because it was
Correct.
Sorin who abandoned that plane.
Because it is,
and Ugin.
It is very clear, not just to us as the audience, but should also be very clear to her, because it was prior to these stories that it was Sorin's fault, not hers.
Okay. Interesting.
So I think it's either a lack of continuity, mischaracterization, or the third thing, which is even worse than the first two, they just want so badly to make it seem like Nahiri's the bad guy in all of this, and Sorin's just this grand old guy.
He's definitely
as opposed to actually they're retconning it again.
Okay.
It just feels like they're retconning it again, and it's just pissing me off, because every single character that is really good and that they did an amazing job characterizing in previous stories, they're just taking a dump on it in later stories. And what is the point of that?
Okay.
Because you need it to fit this very specific narrative that you just like randomly pulled out of your ass about something? Like, it doesn't make sense. It just doesn't.
Okay. I didn't take it that way. Doesn't mean you're wrong. Doesn't mean I'm wrong. Doesn't mean any of that. But if you have perspectives out there, we would love to hear them.
Yeah.
That's what the comment section is for. Continuing the things that you wanted to talk about, the next thing, speaking of Nahiri and her past, especially regarding Sorin, there was the situation with where Nahiri had to swing with Zareth. They were going to have to swing together because Nahiri wasn't able to sling her line, but Zareth had already swung his, or slung his, whatever the proper terminology is. He had anchored his line. And Nahiri wasn't going to be able to get hers out there. And so Zareth was the only one who had a line, so she was going to have to like hold on to him, or vice versa. He was going to have to hold on to her so that they could swing across together. And the story makes a point of mentioning that she's like, well, I thought for a second about the fact that this guy hates me and that he might just let me go when we're swinging out over this open air, but I trust him. And so let's just go. And they go across, and she is fine in the end, obviously, but they reference that.
It's
and
mischaracterization, because it makes way more sense for someone who's been through the things that she's been through to sit there and say, I'm not trusting of this guy right now, when we're trying to get across on this line. And than it does to say that I've abandoned Zendikar. Like, saying that she abandoned Zendikar makes no sense at all. And saying that she trusts this guy randomly makes no sense at all. It makes much more sense for her to be untrusting of that guy, and for her to be... She can feel guilty about what has happened to Zendikar, because she can be pissed off that she was dumb enough to listen to Sorin and Ugin when they convinced her to put the Eldrazi on Zendikar in the first place. But the things that have happened to her because of the abusive, selfish nature of these other people, and the things that have happened to Zendikar as a result of it, or the furthest thing from her fault. And it's one thing for her to feel some guilt for that, but she's not stupid either. She's not going to just all of a sudden decide that it's in no way their fault, entirely her fault, and just, well, I have to fix it, and start running around and trying everything she can to fix this problem, including murdering people. It just doesn't make sense.
Fair enough.
Who she should be focused on murdering is Soren and Ugin, because they did jack shit despite the fact that they said that they would.
Mm-hmm.
And if it wasn't for something as important as we're putting alien, completely destructive creatures into your planet, then maybe she would be able to lose some of that vengefulness with time. And it's been a lot of fucking time. But, and only maybe, but that wouldn't occur if, it wouldn't occur in this situation where it was such a dire occurrence. There's 3 Eldrazi Titans living, like, cryogenically frozen on your planet, and the 2 guys who helped you trap them there are just fucking off. Like, it doesn't make sense at all.
Okay. Well, I will say, though, you did find one moment today, at least, where you appreciated something that they had said in relation to Nahiri.
Yeah.
And so we can jump to that next, because the quote was, again, it wasn't like Nahiri saying it, but it was in the section that was from her perspective. Words were not important. Actions were.
And that makes perfect sense. That fits the character. That fits the situations that she's dealt with. It makes perfect sense for her to sit there and say, I've been told lots of things in my life, and those words never meant a goddamn thing. So only actions matter.
Mm-hmm.
Showing up, helping out, doing something actually matters when empty promises don't.
Right.
That makes perfect sense.
And so in that way, arguably, she trusts Nissa more than she trusts Soren, because when she asked for Nissa's help, Nissa actually showed up,
right,
and even saved her life at one point, arguably,
right,
against that beast with her elemental.
Despite the fact that she now knows that Nissa doesn't like what it is she's trying to do with this core thing.
Correct. And hopefully we'll find out soon, or we're gonna get to find out soon, where that leads, because right now they haven't come back together yet again, once Nissa went and asked for Jace's help, and has now received it after the last story, and we'll find out what happens when those 2 groups, right, the single Nahiri and Jace and Nissa, meet up, because we've seen that in some of the story spotlight cards, but not enough. We just know that they meet up. We'll find out what that means fully in the coming weeks. One thing that I found interesting, though, was the core, right? Nahiri finds the lithoform core, as we know, because if you saw the trailer, this story is the trailer, right? We talked about that. But one of the things that we find out from this story is that the core is whispering to her. She mentions, or the story mentions at one point, that she can't fully understand what it's saying, but that there are whispers. And I kind of felt myself roll my eyes when I read that a bit, and I thought that might not have been fully fair, but I still felt like it was happening, because we just got rid of the Chain Veil.
Yeah.
In War of the Spark, or War of the Spark Forsaken. We just got rid of the Chain Veil, which was an ancient artifact that was whispering to Liliana, that was trying to influence her, and she was exerting her force over it to mostly not be influenced, yet still trying to utilize its power to her benefit.
Right.
But Now we have another one in the core. I assume, I'd like to think that it will just be from now until the end of Zendikar Rising, and then Jace and or Nissa will do something to make that not be an issue anymore. But who the hell knows? Maybe this is the new Chain Veil. It's whispering to her. Maybe once she taps into these whispers, this will be changing her in some way negatively, and maybe that's why she's doing all of this in the first place. That these whispers have been calling out to her, it's lithoform, she's so connected to the stone of the world that she's the only one that can hear it, and it's calling out to her, and that as soon as she gets it, as we see, the plane itself, the royal, etc., is fighting against her even having it at all, because they know the plane knows what it could do, and she is being maybe corrupted by it in the process. That's what it kind of led me to think after today's story, is that that's what we could be dealing with here.
That's an interesting theory. That did not occur to me one iota. I have a very, very drastically different theory on it.
Sure.
Again, that I'm not going to get into in this episode, because I think I need the next story to know if there's any validity to this theory. And so maybe in the next stories, next week, I can talk about these things. But I don't really want to approach it this time around.
Okay, fair enough. And we will. We can get into that next week. In closing on this one for me, I'll say, because I haven't really talked about it yet, but I mentioned at the top, the problems that I had with this story were just, I don't know if it's exactly a problem, because maybe all of you out there appreciated it, and I'm unclear as to exactly how I feel on it, but this story, and I guess this could be just the argument between reading the book versus watching the movie.
Okay.
Truly. Because this story was the entire trailer from start to finish, and that was it. The story obviously gave you insight into what the characters were thinking, which the trailer did not do. But they basically took a 2 to 3 minute trailer and stretched it out into a short story. There's not necessarily something wrong with that in particular, but did it need to occur? Could you have just gotten those story beats from the trailer and said at the top, like, this next story follows the Zendikar Rising trailer. Click to watch it here, right? And then you find out, like, oh, Akiri's dead. Oh, Zareth's dead. Okay, how and why? Well, watch the trailer. It's 2 to 3 minutes. It's not however long it takes you to read this story, but you then don't get the insights into the characters. You don't get the full emotional impact of Akiri holding Zareth's body, noticing that there's no light left in his eyes. Like, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
So is it better to have the trailer as a hype engine for your set, which is important, and then also to have your story fully retell the trailer step by step, shot by shot? Is that okay, or is that too much?
To me, it's this story exists, and we need to make a trailer to hype our set. What is most poignant about what we have existing in the story that is for this plane, for this set? Let's incorporate those pieces into the trailer. So, because, like, when you make a trailer, right, you're using storyboards or whatever to indicate what that trailer's gonna be.
Right.
Before it's made.
Right. Taking, like, the best clips that you're willing to show without giving too much away, but still enough to make people, like, excited to see the movie or the TV show or whatever it is that you happen to be having a trailer.
And the thing that's cool about Magic the Gathering doing trailers is that they're typically less just clips here and there of pieces that you would care about, and more one cohesive story.
Sure.
So I think they took the story, the parts of this story that they thought, and because they thought that this story was such a poignant part of what this set is about, and they made that the trailer.
Okay.
Or they made that, cut into a trailer.
Mm-hmm. All right, fair enough. And then my last question on this one was something that kind of made me laugh, but also like a little frustrated. This story had Akiri, Zareth, and Nahiri. We know this because it was in the trailer and it was in this story that we read. Mm-hmm. Aura and Kaza were in this story as well. And my point was, why? What did they do in story number 2, like episode 2, or in this story? What was the point of their existence at all in this or the last story? How did they advance the plot as characters being included in either of these stories? If you took both of those characters out, you just removed them entirely, any mention of them, any reference of them, would you be missing anything? I just don't understand what their point was. And what I wrote here was, again, these are my initial impressions at the time. I don't know what next week's story is going to be, or 3 weeks from now story is going to be. All I know is, to me, I guess, because at the end of the story we don't know if Aura and Kaza are alive or dead. We are unclear because we heard from Akiri's perspective in that, and we saw them riding the staff or whatever, like flying on the floating staff together. And then they had to escape, but it was Zareth's like, come on, keep running. Right. So Akiri runs away and doesn't see where they went. Okay, what does that mean? Are they alive or dead? And Akiri is unclear, but my point is, so if they don't show up again, ever, what was the point in having them here? And if they do show up again, are you really going to have these two characters who we barely know by name? Are you really going to have these two characters show up and confront Nahiri because she killed their friends? Because at this point, based on where we're at, with the plane fighting against her having the lithiform core, she just murdered 2 innocent people.
Yeah.
Or at least 1 innocent person, and possibly likely caused Zareth's death as well.
Right.
That feels a lot more like a Jason Nissa problem that we want to hear about that next. I'm not sitting here saying to myself, man, I really want to see Aura and Kaza get their revenge on Nahiri, because I'm not stupid.
Right.
It's gonna be Nissa and Jace. It's not gonna be Aura and Kaza. So what the hell was the point of these 2 characters here? They're just 2 named characters that did nothing. They just showed up. They were in danger for a bit, and because they weren't in the trailer, you needed them to be like keeping watch outside or something in this story so that they weren't in the way. Like or that they weren't, you don't have to explain why they weren't in any of the shots from the trailer. It just made that bothered me a bit. Because I was like, what was their purpose? I just don't get it. So
that makes sense.
I can pass that off to all of you as well. If you know a purpose behind these 2 characters, like, hey, without Aura, they wouldn't have said this poignant thing, and it wouldn't have made Akiri and Zareth realize this thing. Let me know. Maybe it's something I missed, but I just don't get it. I don't know what their purpose was. And again, maybe the side story this week is about Aura and Kaza. But the other thing I said to Amy was, I don't believe they're cards in the set. So if they're not, and these side stories are supposed to be about legends from the set, then it also wouldn't make sense to have them in stories.
Right.
So, again, any and all of those things,
I don't know, maybe
I'm
they
curious.
help Nissa and Jace when Nissa and Jace confront Nahiri.
Maybe. We'll have to find out in the coming weeks.
Yeah.
I have no idea, but I will be annoyed if there is no Aura and Kaza payoff, because then it was just a waste of my time reading about them at all and caring about them as characters from start to finish. Because if this is the finish, there was no point. There was no point in having them there at all that I can see. And again, I'd love to hear from all of you, because all of you helping us out and us hopefully helping you as well in understanding the deeper meaning behind some of these stories is a great way for you to join us as we show off our
#Vorthos Pride.
That's right. It's nice to be back on our main set.
It's nice to get to say #Vorthos Pride again.
Yes. So it's nice to be back in general. We're back on our set. We took care of some stuff. We are off from are here following our 14-hour early access preview stream that we did yesterday at the time that we're filming this for Magic the Gathering Arena, thanks to Wizards of the Coast, so thank you to them for that. Thank you to everybody that came out and hung out in chat with us at any point, or just watched. If you were lurking and didn't chat, totally fine as well. We are super happy that you stopped by. If you want to watch it, it's on our channel, although I'm pretty sure YouTube cuts it off after a certain period of time, so I think it's only like 12 hours long instead of 14. Oh no, I'm so sorry. You can only watch 12 hours straight of us playing Magic. So, you know, that was a thing. But yeah, we are here. We didn't stop. We filmed a 14-hour a live stream yesterday and then woke up this morning and filmed this to get it out to you same day because we didn't have time to film this yesterday when the story came out. So that's not to brag. That's not to do anything more than just to let you know that it matters to us. It's important. And so we wanted to share that with all of you. If you are unaware, as we've been saying on our shows and stuff, we stream every Monday and Friday. Even on weeks where we do a 14-hour stream on Wednesday, we stream every Monday and Friday, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern. We would love to see you there on MTG Arena. You can check out our other channels, our other series. We have Video Games for All, Gluten Free for All. Anything that you might need to find out about that stuff is down in the description below. Check us out on our socials as well. But for now, from us here at the Geek for All family of channels, I have been Joe.
And I'm Amy.
Thank you all so very much. And as we always say, in whichever video of ours you watch next, we will see you all next time. Thanks, everybody.